So up next is actually myself and Kelly Sir. We will be talking about the probabilistic messaging survey that was done with partners this past late spring and summer. I've got to make myself a presenter now. And so Kelly is the WCM at WFO Aberdeen, so basically my neighbor to the north. And Kelly has been a critical member, along with many others, on the probabilistic messaging group that has been organized in the Central Region. And she, along with Peter Rogers and Kevin Deitch and Julie DeMuth, were big contributors in putting together this survey and working with the ISD to get that survey out to our partners this summer. And so we wanted to share some of the results with you. So I'm actually going to begin talking, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kelly here in a few minutes, but kind of just give you the lay of the land here of what we did. So, oops, do that. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Again, kind of just what we're going to talk about here. We're just going to go over why we did the survey in the first place, kind of who responded, what we asked, and then much of this talk is really going to focus on our partners and what they said. This is only going to be a very brief and top-level overview of the survey. And so there's going to be a lot more coming, and I'll explain that in a little bit later. And before I go on, I also want to mention Julie DeMuth is here. She was really the person who knows how to ask these questions in a way that's unbiased, so we can help us interpret these answers. So if Kelly and I can't answer your question, Julie is here to also answer your question as we go on. So as many of you may remember, in the winter of 2020-2021, there were 9 WFOs that participated in the probabilistic messaging survey testbed that ran from eastern South Dakota through Iowa into Wisconsin, and then included the northern lower peninsula of Michigan, with Gaylord participating. So as part of the testbed, there was always a plan to do a survey of our partners, because we knew that talking about probabilistic survey, that the research has shown it's very, very useful, but there is a question on whether the how well it's understood by partners yet. And so we wanted to make sure that when we did this testbed, we also did the survey. Unfortunately, developing a survey and putting it out takes a lot of time, a lot more time than we expected. We had to go through OMB to do it. It took us several months to do that. So instead of restricting the survey just to the testbed offices, we decided to expand it to the entire region, and that's what we're going to see here today. But another thing that motivated the survey is some of the questions we received from testbed offices, and one of the biggest ones was the finding I have here from our report, which is that many people found the 25th to 75th percentile ranges at times too large, and therefore there's a lot of question on the value of that for decision makers. And so we developed questions to focus on that specific concern of forecasters. How do our partners react to those? So you'll see the response to one of those questions here today. So, and it was to evaluate our partners' thoughts and opinions on winter weather forecasts that we are providing them. And that includes probabilistic information, because that is a new aspect to the suite of information that we are giving to our partners through DSS packets, as well as through social media. Now, we didn't ask the public of their opinion, so this is focused solely on partners that WCMs and that all of us communicate with. And our real focus was on emergency management, schools, specifically school superintendents who are making that close or no close call, and transportation officials, the people who have to plow our roads. As you'll see, other people did respond as well, but that was the focus of our survey. And the survey was fielded between May 31st and July 12th. So basically Memorial Day to July 4th, this past summer. So here's who completed our survey. You'll see emergency managers comprised 35%, about 35% of our respondents, and there were 2,503 responses. School officials, superintendents were comprised a little over 20%. DOT people comprised a little under 10%, And then there's this category of others. And we haven't checked yet who the others all are, but they are partners because we only sent the survey to partners, but they may be other officials that we didn't specifically focus on, but we are going to take a look at, see how they divide out as we review the results later on. They comprise a little over 30% of our group. So what did we ask them? Well, first of all, we asked how they get information. Do they get it from us? Do they use weather radio, TV, internet, social media? Basically, where are they getting their information from when they're trying to decide what they need to do? And then we also asked about thresholds for taking action and what kind of lead time they need, because different officials need different information. For DOTs, they may need a lot of lead time, especially on a holiday weekend. For school officials, it may be 24 hours or less. So we wanted to know that information because that makes an impact on what kind of information we're also delivering to them in terms of probabilities versus deterministic. We also asked about preferences and probabilistic information. And finally, we asked about their understanding, uses, and the usefulness of the different probabilistic information that we provide. A lot of this focused on probability of exceedance and on different snowfall ranges, so that they would have, so we could get information on how they understand that information and if they find it useful when they're trying to make a decision on what they're going to do, whether it's closing schools or opening shelters or something else. So what we're going to show you today is what partners prefer for displaying probability of exceedance. What kind of color curve did they like? We showed them percentiles as well. What did they prefer when they looked at it, at those probability of exceedance graphics? We also will get a little bit more into how partners interpreted and used snowfall ranges. On the bottom is an example of using the 25th to 75th. How did they use that? How did they find it useful? What are they exactly looking at, and how did they interpret it? And what numbers are they using to make a decision? So that, again, this is just a small part of the survey that we're delivering. The survey report itself is going to be delivered to Central Region by the end of the calendar year, so by December 31st. And we want to share that with all of you, not just management, but to everyone sometime in January, so you can read what people responded and then some of our interpretation of those results. Specifically, the probabilistic messaging group, which I'm the head of, will review that report and develop best practices that we hope to share with all of you here by next fall, which may include some training, and then we can put those best practices into effect as we enter the fall of the 2023-2024 winter. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kelly, and she will deliver the results for you.
All right, thanks, Phil. Again, as Phil mentioned, this is just barely scratching the surface of what the entire survey contains. We just don't have enough time to go too in depth, and so we're just giving you a brief glimpse here of some types of questions we ask and the answers we got in response. So the first question you see up on your screen here was a simple preference question. It's probability of exceedance displayed in two different ways. The motivation was to try to see if people preferred the blue scale, which you see on the national prob messaging graphics, or this yellow, orange, red scale that was tested by a few offices in the test bed. And so it was a simple question. There were two images. We told the respondents that they show the exact same thing, and then we asked what they prefer. So on the next slide, you will see the responses broken out by user group. And so the blue bars are going to be emergency managers, the orange school officials, the gray transportation officials, and the yellow other. This particular question didn't give us overwhelming results one way or the other. There was only a slight preference overall toward the red, orange, yellow graphic that you see on the right-hand side there. Now, we also only asked preference. We didn't ask, what about this do you prefer? Because there are actually two separate differences between these graphics. The blue one is blue and has a graduated scale, where the yellow, orange, red is a different color, but it also has that binned scale where it's broken into low, medium, high. So we did not ask the user if it was simply color or if it was because of the different scales that you see on both of them. So that's a question that we'll have to look into in the future. We also plan on looking to see if this varies by CWA or by region, because certain CWAs use these color schemes differently or more frequently. And so we'd be very interested to see too if users, because they are exposed to one or the other more often, that it's more comfortable, and then that's could be why they prefer it as well. So that was the first just simple preference question. The next graphic on our next slide here goes more in depth. We are going to consider this graphic the entire time for the rest of the questions you see here, but we asked users multiple follow-up questions all pertaining to this graphic. So the behind this one was this is a typical weather story or IDSS-esque type graphic that any office in Central Region may produce. So we want to know how the user responds to this, how they use it, what parts of it that they like. And then also we included a snowfall map with a 25th to 75th percentile range. And we purposely chose a snowfall map where the range was very high. And that's where we focus the user's attention, because we want to know what they do when we get into these uncertain situations and we have this really large snowfall range. How does the respondent act? What can they do with that information? Is it helpful or not? So the very first question is we told the user that they should imagine that they work in their current job role, whether that's emergency management or schools or transportation, and that they were in Marshalltown. And so if they got a forecast like this, we asked them how likely they would be to do the following. Would they monitor the National Weather Service for updated information? Would they prepare for the storm? Would they contact the local National Weather Service office to talk to someone about this forecast? Or would they seek the forecast from someone other than the National Weather Service who could give more certain information? So on the next slide, we have the breakdown for this particular question. This is not broken out by user group, but it is for all of Central Region. And so you can see on the first line here, when we asked people how likely they would be to monitor the National Weather Service for updated information, over 90% said they're very to extremely likely to continue to monitor the National Weather Service for updated information after getting this forecast. When we asked about preparations, over 80% said they were very or extremely likely to begin preparing for the storm at this point. Only about 20% were very to extremely likely to contact their local National Weather Service office and talk about the storm. And roughly 30% were very to extremely likely to seek a forecast from someone outside of the National Weather Service who could give them more certain information. But on the other hand, about 43% say they're not at all or not very likely to do this. So we took this exact same question now and broke it out by user group. So on the next slide, you'll see that it's broken out by user group, and your y-axis is going to be the mean response, where 1 is not at all likely and 5 is extremely likely. This allowed us to place all the groups together here on one chart. So when we look at this by user group and overall, all groups are highly likely to monitor the National Weather Service for updated information. We didn't really see any difference between those user groups. They all said, yep, we're going to continue to monitor. All groups are highly likely to prepare for the storm, but this is where we see one user group stand out a bit more. And transportation officials said that they were most of all likely to prepare at this point. EMs and transportation officials are more likely to contact their local National Weather Service office, and transportation officials and school officials are more likely to seek a forecast from someone else, which this is expected, especially from the transportation official side, where most DOTs also have a private contractor that they work with, so that certainly makes sense. On the next slide now, we took all the respondents who said they said they would actually prepare for the storm. So if they said they were somewhat likely, very likely, extremely likely to prepare, we then asked them a follow-up question. And we said, looking at the graphic, again, this is the same graphic that I showed on the very first slide. Looking at this graphic, what parts of it are most helpful for you to start preparing? They could select multiple options on this answer, so they could select them all, or they could select one or two, whatever it applied in their situation. The vast majority of people said that the snowfall ranges were indeed helpful when it comes to preparing. Nearly 2/3 of people said that the text on the side was also very helpful in this situation. Over a half of people said the colors or the upper snowfall bounds were helpful. Fewer people said that the lower snowfall bounds were helpful, but 30% of respondents did select this and noted that it was at least somewhat helpful for preparation. So on the next slide, we dug even deeper into a question relating to the actual snowfall range, this large snowfall range of 3 to 10 inches. And we asked the respondents how useful this forecast would be to them. Over 55% of people in all user groups said the snowfall range was very or extremely useful. Over 90% of people in all groups said it was somewhat, very, or extremely useful. Only 8%, roughly 8% said that it was not at all or not very useful. One note here is there was the transportation official group did stand out. Again, in this scenario, they were more likely to say that it was extremely useful and less likely to say it was not at all or not very useful in this scenario, as compared to the other groups, the emergency managers of schools or the others. So they stood out as compared to the other user groups in this example. So on the next slide, we then asked, given that large 3 to 10 inch snowfall amount, what are you actually preparing for? Because it is so large, and certainly there's different actions that would be taken within a range that large. When we asked that question, over half of the respondents across all groups said they prepare for the midpoint amount, so about 6 to 7 inches is what they're preparing for. But especially the school officials, and they tended to stand out. We saw transportation officials stand out in the last couple of questions. Now the school officials are standing out here. 70% of those said they would prepare for this amount. More than a quarter of EMs, transportation officials, and other partners said they would prepare for the high-end amount of 10 inches, although you'll notice the schools are much lower here. Only about 10% selected that option. A greater percent of school officials say they'll prepare for the low-end amount of 3 inches compared to other groups. Now, we don't know exactly why the schools respond slightly differently than the other groups here. We do have some theories. Perhaps once they prepare for that 6 to 7 inches, there's not much more they would do differently at 10 inches. They're already canceling events or schools or things like that. But it's certainly something that we could follow up with our partners and learn more about. So finally, on the last graphic here, the final question we asked relating to this graphic was, which scenario would cause the most problems for your work operations? So they were set up with 3 different scenarios. We asked if there was a 3 to 10 inch snowfall forecast, so a very large range, and the snowfall fell within that range, would that be problematic? Then we asked if you got a 3 to 5 inch snowfall forecast, so a much smaller range, but the actual observed snowfall ended up being 10 inches or more, would that be problematic? And finally, we asked, what if you had a 6 to 10 inch snowfall forecast, but the actual observed snow ended up being 3 inches or less, would that be problematic? A majority, 60 to 80% of all respondents indicate the most problematic scenario would be a small 3 to 5 inch snowfall range, but snowfall amounts of observed at 10 inches or more would be most problematic. A larger percentage of emergency managers, transportation officials, and other partners indicated this is problematic as compared to schools. Schools, again, stand out here. On the other hand, a larger percentage of school officials say it's problematic to have a 6 to 10 inch snow forecast, and the actual snow amounts ended up being observed at 3 inches or less. Again, we don't know exactly why this might be. Some theories may be because they have canceled school now and it didn't actually happen. And so now you're dealing with angry parents, or the effects of sending children home and children being home unsupervised, which we know schools do battle with that as well, which is a whole another set of issues that can arise. So just to summarize here, again, just scratching the surface. We have to get through all of the information through the survey, and we're going to work on that over the next several months. But just based off of what you saw here, a few key points are, even when given a very wide, uncertain snowfall range, more than half of respondents found the information to be very useful or extremely useful, and less than 8% said it was not at all or not very useful. So even a wide forecast, the respondents are finding value in that information. Even with the wide snowfall range, all groups are highly likely to monitor the National Weather Service for updated information and to prepare if they're giving a forecast like that. Respondents indicated that multiple aspects of the graphics are helpful. So they're telling us that the context, along with that snowfall map, the context, where do they fall within that gradient, the colors on the map, what does the text say on the side, that is also helpful to them. And then a majority of respondents indicate the most problematic scenario is a 3 to 5 inch forecast with snowfall amounts ending up being observed at 10 inches or more. And so they're telling us they don't want to get caught behind. And really, in my opinion, the best way to give them this information so they aren't caught behind is to show the probabilities in these situations. What is the worst case scenario? What is the best case scenario based off of our ensemble of models that we are working with? So just to summarize, Phil had kind of mentioned here our future plans on the next slide. This is just a small subset. We're working diligently to get all of this data crunched. We have a lot of different ways we want to look at it, especially a breakdown of spatial analysis by CWA, and we hope to make those available to each individual CWA if they want to see specifically for their area. We want to break it down by region, climatology. We know even just sub-regional groups, we know that a Great Lakes office might have different responses as compared to a Northern Plains office or compared to a Rocky Mountains office. So we want to provide some of that information as well. Phil mentioned we'll have a report by year end, and the probabilistic messaging group will share best practices next season. The survey does have OMB approval for the next 3 years, which means that we will be able to field this again, and we do plan to do so that we can get additional information and continue to analyze this data over a long period of time. The last slide here, we just want to give a shout out to everybody who has helped. Phil alluded to this, but the effort to get a survey like this up and off the ground and through the proper channels through OMB takes a huge effort. The Northern Plains WCM group was a huge part of that. Peter Rogers led us through the process of getting it pushed through OMB, and the rest of our group reviewed the questions to make sure that we were picking good questions that we wanted answers to. Kevin, who is part of the probabilistic messaging team with me and helped significantly to develop the survey and get it pushed through as well. And everybody else in Central Region. Julie and her team, Robert and Chris at NCAR, are amazing. They work behind the scenes and they have done a ton of work, and they have been a great help to us. So we certainly need to mention their names. Vankita Brown at the National Weather Service headquarters for helping with the OMB process. She's done it before, so she guided us through it. And then everybody who distributed the survey and all the partners who took the time to respond. It certainly is a group effort to get this off the ground. So with that, I will stop. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but Julie is here with us if we have some questions that need to be answered.